The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
CJ, let's start with the big news story of the week. The NHL and Rogers agreeing to a new 12-year, $7.7 billion contract. That's in U.S. figures. That's about $11 billion in Canadian on the national broadcasting rights that begin in 2026. How did this deal come together? Why will we continue to have the NHL on Rogers?
Well, I think the biggest thing to underline here is that Rogers had an exclusive negotiating window with the NHL on extending the deal that they had reached, many years ago. And so we never got to a point where that window didn't exist. It ran through the first 2 months of the year. They extended it into March, and ultimately they got the deal done to extend the rights. Now, as you kind of allude to there's still a lot to be worked out, I think, in terms of, potentially licensing some of those rights to other providers. The French language aspect of this hasn't been finalized, but essentially, Rogers and the NHL have liked doing business with each other. Rogers, obviously, a very deep-pocketed company that owns a significant portion of every professional sporting entity in this country, from the Blue Jays to the Leafs to the Raptors to the arenas, and then obviously the Sportsnet channels that are the national home of the NHL's games in Canada. So, it was a deep-pocketed owner that was willing to up its offer, and it never really got to what we would call market in terms of other companies being able to formally bid on any of those rights.
So what does that mean for Amazon? They have the Monday night games, and people wondered if that would be a gateway for them to get a piece of the pie on the next broadcasting deal. What about TSN? What about some of these other channels who maybe people thought would get in on this?
Well, I should add this disclaimer before I go any further. Probably should have done it before my first answer. There's no way for me to answer any of this without some appearance of bias. And for anyone who doesn't know my history, just quickly, I worked at Rogers when they got the 12-year deal that's existing. I spent 7 years of that deal working for that company, part of their broadcast, and they're in studio for 4 seasons at Hockey Night in Canada. I now work at TSN. I'm in my 4th season there. And so, there's obviously, I don't want anything, I'm not taking sides or anything like that. I've got lots of great friends who work on both sides of the aisle because of my 2 tenures. But there's no way for me to answer this where it might not appear that biased. I just want to get that out of the way and say it, explicitly. And the truth is, I don't know what it means for TSN, even though I work there. I mean, I'm not having those discussions with management, except to know that TSN remains very much in the business of hockey, and I'm sure we'll explore opportunities. Amazon's going to be an interesting one. I mean, Tony Saffieri, one of the Rogers executives, basically acknowledged at the press conference the league held on Wednesday that Amazon is likely to stay on licensing games from Rogers, which is something they did last season. They're doing again now. But what that looks like, does it move away from Monday nights, which is the night that Amazon has had those rights? Those things still need to be worked out. But I would expect, just given how forcefully Amazon Canada has jumped into the NHL arena, both with the, behind the scenes show that we've talked about, the docuseries, getting into game broadcasting, the kinds of people they've hired, both off camera and on, they're serious. I actually went to the Amazon launch party last September in Toronto. And honestly, of all the things that stood out to me the most is you look around the room and it's like, there's Gary Bettman, there's Bill Daly, there's Steve Mayer, there's all their senior PR staff. Like, the NHL showed out in force. And I did say to one of those people, like, oh, wow, there's a lot of you here. And he's like, well, Amazon's an important partner of ours. And so nothing about that suggested to me that it was going to be a short-term partnership. But, at this time, that basically the first big block of, games has been sold or has been committed to Rogers. And now there have to be sub-agreements that flow out of that. And, nothing is done right now. So I don't want to get too far ahead, other than to say it would surprise me if Amazon wasn't trying to keep growing its profile and showing games. And, Rogers is certainly open to doing that, but now they've got to make a deal.
Yeah, I mean, just seeing feedback from fans throughout this season about what Amazon's broadcast has been like, and watching the broadcast whenever I get a chance, whether Adnan Virk is on or Andy Petrillo, there's been a lot of praise from fans on how they've gone about their Monday night games. I share that same thinking with you. I'd be very stunned if they didn't get some other piece of the pie, which is maybe another day, maybe just some other games in and out of the schedule, however they see fit. But just with the way Amazon has entered themselves into the discussion of broadcasting NHL games, particularly in Canada, like I'd be very surprised if they didn't get something. I won't say significant, but like I think they're going to get something in this.
Yeah, and look, I mean, they're in a position where they can try something new. I think that people like new, and that's, again, not a shot at any existing partners. But, part of what's been exciting in the U.S. is getting TNT on the scene. They've taken a fresh view of hockey. They've done their panels a little differently. They've had a nice little, I don't know if we'll call them full innovations, but just new approaches to, packaging the NHL product. And I think it's largely been met with people appreciating those efforts. And that's something Amazon can do. They don't have the constraints, I'll call them, of typical over-the-air TV, right? They're coming in as a streaming service. They can do intermissions differently. Heck, they even had our compatriots from the SDP on an intermission during a Leafs game earlier this season. So, I think that that's good energy for the league. And I've heard all kinds of rumors unsubstantiated about them maybe wanting to get on 2 nights in the future or maybe part of, some other things. And so I just think that they're going to continue to look for ways to grow kind of their interest and footprint. The flip side of this for Rogers and having the full package it's a lot of real estate, right? Like it's a lot of games to produce. It's a lot of, they obviously have the channels, but they have to find a place to show all these games. I mean, it's a strain to a degree. And so I think that they have this insider knowledge now of having managed this for now in their 11th season. I think of like what that they can cut or pass on to someone else, where they can best channel their own resources. I mean, I think some of those things are of benefit to them. They also still have regional rights, for some teams. Like they share the regional rights with TSN, for example, with the Maple Leafs games, the Oilers games. They got the reach. So it's a long way of saying they have they've got a lot of food on their plate, and they might not have the stomach to eat it all. So, it's not bad, as much as obviously they didn't, in this case, they pursued continuing control of all of that package. Now they can sort of sub-license it out as they see fit. And I don't know if there's anyone even not on our radar that might try to get in on that. I mean, that's maybe the discovery period that you have right now, because, we should underline next season is still part of the original Rogers NHL deal. So, what we're talking about is a contract that actually kicks in starting the 2026-2027 NHL season.
Yeah, big year next year with that deal. You talk about sub-licensing. I think the final year of the Hockey Night in Canada CBC sub-license also next year as well. There's a lot for 2025, 2026 with regards to this deal as well. I'll just mention... We shouldn't sleep.
I was going to say, we shouldn't sleep on the biggest thing here, the money.
Oh, that's a lot of money. It's a ton of money.
Yeah, I mean, it's more than double what the last deal was. And, when we look at now, we've had these salary cap projections leaked and the Players Association put out in January, for the next 3 seasons. A lot of that is built on the anticipation for this deal, like knowing that, the NHL is a $7 billion business, call it. This is nearly $1 billion a season. Now that's Canadian funds. So, I mean, I don't know this quick math in my head. Canadian dollar's not doing too hot right now, but I mean, this adds a meaningful amount of hockey related revenue to each season once it kicks in. And that's part of growing, driving the growth and then ultimately driving the cap going up. And I think the average fan who maybe isn't dialed into the business side of the game, why that matters, of course, is it's going to have significant impact on how teams manage their situations, on player movement, on free agent contracts, to the degree people care about that. I mean, I think we're moving into, this is helping transition the league into a different era, or a different epoch, we'll call it, where it's not like the rules are necessarily changing and how, the cap works or anything like that, but the cap is actually changing, right? Because it was so, those COVID years, it was so flat for so long, it kind of crushed a lot of things. This does open up not just new opportunities for, how you might digest, NHL's product directly, but, financially, it does change the landscape a bit. And I think we're going to see some of the impacts of that as soon as this summer, just in terms of player movement and things like that.
Can I say something just on the broadcast themselves with Sportsnet? And you don't have to go there, but I kind of want to go there a little bit, just for me. Like, I've seen a lot of the feedback from fans on this deal. Since we're both in media, I'm in media. I've appeared on Sportsnet platforms before. I'm not gonna use this as an opportunity to bash. I'm just gonna say I want to be optimistic that those guys who are running things with how things went the first 12 years, and I know they still have one more year left, I want to be optimistic that, maybe they've looked at what's being done south of the border, particularly on TNT. We see more innovations with the game itself and Amazon and how they're showing stuff. I want to be optimistic that over the next course of this deal, whether you're mostly watching games on Sportsnet or you're watching games on Amazon, like, it gets better for us as hockey fans. Because look, we're media people, but as hockey fans at the end of the day, we're watching a lot of this stuff on TV. I want to be optimistic about the fact that they're going out and saying that there are going to be fewer regional blackouts. They're going to turn a lot more of those games into more national games. Like, I don't know. I don't want to be negative, like what I've seen from a lot of people. That's not me trying to I'm not naive. I just want to be positive and optimistic that this could be a good thing, just because I've seen a lot of negative with regards to this news story from fans. And I know you've seen that too.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's a lot of people at Sportsnet that do good work. I mean, there's no way around that fact. As I reflect back, when they got the deal last time, they spent a lot of money. They brought in a lot of people that were established on-air talents from other networks. They built a pretty robust team. I'll never probably forget this. They threw a launch party at the Ritz-Carlton, where there was literally lobster tails and champagne and everything in between. It was a really exciting time as someone who worked there. I was much younger in the industry, of course. It was awesome. But then over a period of time, either they got out over their skis and spent too much money, or maybe this was always just going to be the natural way of things. You start off with this exuberance and then you make decisions, you figure out what works and what doesn't, and you make decisions. But, a lot of talent flowed out of the company. And, some of those were financial cutbacks. Some of those were people choosing to move on, which was the case in my case personally. And, and so I think that's had some impact on how people view the product. But I will say that nowhere is perfect. No one is ever, you're doing a very public job. It's sort of the way individually we take some heat maybe on social media at times, or, you see people in comments on your articles, Julian, or, maybe in the comments on YouTube of this very program.
Don't remind me of those comments. I don't look at comments, but don't remind me of that.
Right. And so, look, and that's part of existing in the public sphere is to be criticized, right? And we have to remember, people come to us for entertainment. People have challenging lives and they're managing a lot and they're stressed out. But this is when they, flip on a Sportsnet broadcast to watch an NHL game, or maybe when they tune into the CJ show on YouTube, they're doing that with the 30 minutes or 2 hours they have free to maybe veg. And that's where you get some of that frustration out. I mean, honestly, if we're boiling sports fandom down, that's kind of what it all is. Right.
Yeah.
And so, I guess what I'm saying is, when you're in that seat and you're, there's going to be some of that going on. But, I think we should be optimistic. I think the world continues to change and evolve. Even the size of this deal, like people thought the last deal was crazy big, 5.2 billion. And that was Canadian funds. Now you get to 11 billion Canadian funds.
Sheesh.
It's like so much money, it's hard to imagine. But the other part of that is if you're spending that much money on the rights, you have to also spend money to put the games on and to, help showcase the NHL's product. And I'm sure Rogers will continue to do that. Yep.
Well, here's to another how many years and hopefully improvements on the product. Anyway, unless there was anything else we needed to mention off of this story, we can move on. I don't think there was anything else we need to top off.
Nope, I think that's good there, bud.
I'm good with that. Let's go to the Alexander Ovechkin story. 3 goals away from 895. Gary Bettman in the house for these games. You've been all over the Ovechkin story, what the goal could look like in terms of the celebrations, the traveling circus. What's the latest we're hearing on what that particular traveling circus, the Gary Bettmans, the Wayne Gretzky's following around could look like?
Yeah, it's growing in scope with each passing game. They played in Boston on Tuesday night, and it was a smaller group that was there, including Ovechkin's family. His wife Nastia was there at that game. He scores in that game to get within 4. Wednesday night, they're in Raleigh. Then you have Gary Bettman and some of the senior league staff joining the fold. Ted Leonsis, the Capitals' principal owner, is there. He scores again in that game. Now he's within 3 of breaking the record. On Friday night when Washington plays Chicago, I think Wayne Gretzky will be part of the crew that's there. And then obviously, you've also got, especially the games in Washington, you're going to have a whole, barrel full of former teammates. Nicholas Backstrom has said that obviously Ovi's main running mate throughout his career has said that he's going to be there when the record could fall. And so it's like a snowball running downhill now. And, you're going to see more and more people because, now he's within 3. It's not hard to imagine an Alex Ovechkin hat trick. It can literally happen anytime the game starts. You're not asking. I mean, it could have theoretically happened at 5 or 6, but it's less likely. You get to 3 or maybe 2, and obviously everyone's bracing for it. And so, it's, I think it's the fact he's just scoring every game too, Julian. It feels like, I think it's easy to get lost in the numbers. But this guy is 39 and he sits at 39 goals. I mean, it's just, you don't really see that. And while obviously we might focus on areas of Ovechkin's game where he's not as impactful as he once was, scoring is still the hardest thing to do in the game. And he's finding still ways to do it. And obviously that's how you get to this sort of precipice of history where we're sitting. The NHL, you might have noticed, is putting out press releases after every goal he scores now. There's an OV cast on the games being shown in the States. So, basically whether you're watching on ESPN or TNT, whoever has the game that night, you can watch a fixed camera on Ovechkin that runs alongside the game feed. It's real now, I would say. And, it feels almost inevitable he's going to get there this season. There's still only 7 games and it's 3 goals. Like, it's not automatic, especially if he if he goes a couple games and doesn't score, then the pressure I think will ramp up a little bit more. But it almost feels like the opposite effect is happening, that the closer it's getting in sights, it's almost like he's more focused and just is going to find a way to get it done here. So, I mean, maybe before we record our next show, the Capitals play Friday and Sunday. So there's a world that by Monday that this record has fallen. I know I've been all over the map. We were doing predictions way earlier in the year. We talked recently and I was saying it's going to go down to the last game of the season. Now I'm landed back on, I hope it happens at home, just because I think the enthusiasm would be something else if you can get it done at the Capital One Center, just, surrounded by their fans. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of where we're at, but it just feeling inevitable, which, you go back to any conversation with this before the season. I mean, the guy needed 42 in this year to get to breaking the record. And then you say he's going to break his leg and miss 16 games and he's still got a chance to do it. I mean, it's, when you're watching something in real time, sometimes it's hard to appreciate what you're watching, but I don't think we should look past the fact that, you're going to have to live a long time, I think, to see something in the NHL that just an individual record of this nature to fall. I'm not sure when the next one would be. I know guys like Austin Matthews and Leon Draisaitl are on pretty good rates in terms of maybe being able to threaten this goal mark at some point, but that discounts the fact that the hardest part of this is to keep being this productive right through your 30s. I'm not saying it's easy to do what they're doing in their 20s to get to where you're halfway there, but the second half of the race is always a little bit harder for anyone who's run a distance race.
I like that tie-in to you running, of course. 3 more home games for Washington between now and the end of the season, including that Friday night game against Chicago, which I'm kind of hoping it ends in a hat trick for Ovechkin. Not because it's against Chicago and we know where Chicago is in the standings, but considering what Alexander Ovechkin is at least known for on the ice, I feel like him scoring a hat trick and providing the goals bonanza, at least for the NHL, at least from a spectacle standpoint, that would be pretty fun to watch.
Yeah, it honestly can't be ruled out that would be the way the record falls. I mean, when you think about it, you get one in the first period, and then everyone, the Capitals are obviously looking for him. This is top of mind. I mean, as much as those of us from the outside, we're talking about all these people, joining to watch the games. Well, if you're inside it, if you're a player on the team, you're aware of this, right? I mean, you're seeing more and more people around the team. I'm not saying that they're scanning the boxes around the arena to see exactly who's in attendance, but there's just going to be more hoopla that's growing. There'll be more reporters there. Obviously, some of our colleagues have been dispatched. One of the cameramen in Toronto that a buddy of mine, I see he's on day 8 of the Ovi chase, but he's going wherever the Caps are. I mean, that's what it's been like. So, it's going to be, it's a pretty important moment for the NHL. I think it's the sort of thing that will go beyond just, our corner of the hockey world, as it gets there. And, looks like it's going to happen this season. Although I reserve the right to become more pessimistic if he doesn't score in the next 2 games and we do the Monday show and it's 3 goals in 5 games. He's under the gun.
I also hope it's not Sunday afternoon against the New York Islanders. Nothing against the Islanders. It's just kind of like a random afternoon slot. I mean, maybe you don't have anything better to do and you're totally cool with watching that game on a Sunday. I just feel like it would just be a little anticlimactic, but maybe I'm just overthinking it a little bit schedule-wise.
You might be galaxy braining it a little bit.
Fair. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with getting that wrong. That's just
I don't say wrong. It's just the problem is with a record like this, you don't know when it's part of the allure is it could happen in any game, right? And it could be into an empty net, honestly. Unless, who knows, maybe Spencer Carberry, if he's tied for the record and they have an empty net situation, maybe he doesn't put him on the ice. I don't know. Maybe they've decided he doesn't want to score it that way. But, you can't script these things exactly, even as much as we know it's probably going to happen. We don't know how it's going to happen. We don't know what the goal is going to look like. We don't know if there's going to be a video review. We don't know if it's going to be a typical one-timer. Part of the mystery or the unknown about that is what I enjoy about it, honestly.
One other thing too, I mean, not the Sunday, but imagine if it goes back to Thursday, a rematch between Carolina and Washington. I don't know if you caught the end of yesterday's game between Carolina and Washington. A lot of fighting, a lot of back and forth. You see Jalen Chatfield on Connor McMichael just throwing him down on the ice. That was a pretty brutal takedown.
Yeah, it was a dangerous play. Didn't like seeing that. Yeah. But I mean, what you're reminded of in a game like that is, and it ends up a 5-1 score, so it's not a close game, but those are 2 teams that are probably going to see each other in the playoffs, or there's at least some reasonable degree of probability they'll see each other in the playoffs trying to come out of the Metropolitan Division. So, as much as I guess our focus at this time of year, it's you're going between a whole bunch of different things. It's the electric Canadians comeback on Tuesday night against Florida with the late tying goal and winner in OT by Suzuki. And you're thinking about the playoff races. But then even in a 5-1 game that doesn't really matter much for the standings, it's just a reminder like, hey, we are so close now to the start of the Stanley Cup playoffs. And I'm sure that's on the minds of the players. I know some of the teams at the top of the league are just like, they want to get through this next 2 weeks. Obviously, everyone's trying to get through it healthy is probably the most important thing for teams looking to go on the run. But there's just teams in different phases right now. You've got the bottom 5 or 6 or 7 that are already officially eliminated, that are thinking about the off season. You've got the middle pack that there's still a real fight going on for the playoff spots. And then the teams at the top are probably hoping to hit fast forward till April 17th, April 18th, and the start of, what was going to be, they're hoping, a long playoff run.
CJ, what do you think of the Atlantic division race right now with Toronto, Tampa, and Florida having a chance at that division? I know Toronto won last night, but still very much a race.
Yeah, the cool part about it is, the Leafs and Panthers play each other again. The Leafs and Lightning play each other again. Florida and Tampa play each other again. And so to some degree, when you get to the end here, those teams will sort of decide it, I think, amongst themselves. I suppose there's a world where they split those games evenly, and that isn't the case. But, if one team or the other sweeps their part of those head-to-head matchups, good chance they're finishing at least second in the division. It's funny. I don't know how much it matters individually to the teams. Like, it seems to me it matters more to the Leafs to some degree to try to finish first. I think having home ice advantage, I think avoiding either Florida matchup in the round 1 is appealing. For the teams like the Panthers and the Lightning that have, been between them, they've been to the last 5 straight Stanley Cup finals. And obviously Tampa won 2 and Florida won last year. I feel like the seeding aspect of it is a little less important to them. It's not to say they don't want to win the division. Don't get me wrong. Every team's trying to win every game and hoping it works out. But it doesn't feel like the stakes are quite the same. Plus, you look at Florida. I mean, they're really injured right now. I mean, they, already without Matthew Tkachuk through, into the start of the playoffs. They lost Nico Sturm this week, veteran fourth line center. They picked up Alexander Barkov, missed a game against the Leafs. You've still got Aaron Ekblad dealing with his suspension for performance-enhancing substance. And since he's gone to at least game 3 of the round 1, they've lost Dmitry Kulikov. And so the Panthers, it really feels like of the 3 teams, when I talk about teams wanting to get through it, I feel like they want to get through it and just get to the playoffs. And obviously they're hoping to get some of those guys back healthy. But, they're in a tough spot. The Lightning have been kind of surging. And the Leafs have been surging. Toronto 7-1-1 in the last 9 games. And so it's compelling to watch because we got a world where it's the Battle of Ontario and the Battle of Florida happening perhaps to start the playoffs if the Leafs win the division. It might be a mix of the two. It could be Florida, Ontario. It feels like it could go right down, if not to the last day of the season, certainly to the last week of the season before that's decided. And obviously that has direct impacts on you and I, but I think that it's something obviously fans are keeping an eye on because there's a lot of history between the 2 Florida teams with each other, the Leafs and the Florida teams. And now Ottawa's getting back on the scene here, and we got to see how it all mixes together.
Still rooting for that Battle of Ontario, my friend. I'm telling you, that matchup, super fun. Still rooting for that to happen.
It would be. And honestly, the thing I'm wondering about, because Ottawa's main rival is the Leafs. Like, I feel like Ottawa focuses a lot on the Leafs, probably because the original history, quite honestly. I mean, playing 4 playoff series in 5 years, and for a whole generation of fans, they missed that, and they're not really aware of that. But that set the stage for, I think, the conditions that exist today. But for, the Senators to return to the playoffs would be the first time since 2017, which was the start of this Leafs run where they've made it 9 years in a row. By the way, I'm not going to go on a rant here, but for anyone who wants to get in this freaking argument, the 2020 playoffs were the playoffs. If you played in the play-in, you played playoff games. You go to the stats page at NHL.com. Anyone who played just in the play-in games, those were the playoffs. It's no one's fault the season was stopped by a pandemic. But, there's so many people in my mentions saying the Leafs didn't make the playoffs that year. It's just wrong. I mean, they were third in the Atlantic Division when the season was paused for the coronavirus pandemic. They played playoff games. They lost a 5-game play-in to Columbus. But any of their players that dressed in those games, those were playoff stats. Anyway, long way of saying the Leafs started a run of 9 straight years in the playoffs in 2017. I mean, it would be bookended. It would be delicious, and obviously would bring us together in person. I don't know if we'd actually do the shows in person. We might still be from a hotel room in our houses or whatever, but we'd at least be seeing each other a lot over that 10 days to 2 weeks.
Did you get something off your chest with the 2020 playoff explanation?
Yes, because after the Leafs officially clinched their spot with the win over Florida on Wednesday, I just tweeted a very innocuous tweet. Leafs officially clinched a playoff spot for the 9th consecutive season. And then all the yeah, but guys ran to my mentions. Yeah, but 2020, blah, 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 blah. We had producer Drew in our friggin' group chat on about it. I don't want to hear it. The league counts those as playoff games. Like, at the end of the day, I don't know what asterisk you want to tie to it. And it's such a weird thing. To me, it's like you almost want to use this strange Corona loophole to try to discount what the Leafs accomplished. Like, it's not like the Leafs got in as the 24th team in a 24-team tournament because of Corona. Like, they were a playoff team when the season stopped. And then the season resumed and they played playoff games. So I just don't want to hear it from the yeah, but crowd. So yeah, I said I wouldn't go on a rant, and now I'm veering dangerously close to rant territory.
I love it personally. In the group chat as well, I share CJ's opinion, by the way. Jesse made like a graphic with me that says, I love Gary Bettman. Just, there's nothing to do with Gary Bettman. It's just, if that's what it is, that's what it is. If it's the playoffs, it's the playoffs. I don't see what the big deal is. Anyway.
Yes, and let's go back to the original reason why the playoffs were unusual that year. It's because the season was stopped with no advance warning because of a global pandemic. So, like, I get it. It means that more teams made the playoffs than would in a normal year. They did that because there were still 10 to 12 games left on every team's schedule, and no one could prepare for that. And so you had to account for that fact with what you did when you resumed. So I just don't understand this weird, like, everyone wants to use like this loophole, but it's like, no, that was it. Yes, it was a weird playoffs. It was a weird frickin' year for anyone that remembers it. I know most people are trying to bury that down, but it was a weird time. And anyway, it was still the playoffs because you can go to Jason Spezza's Hockey DB page or Austin Matthews' Hockey DB page, and they will have playoff games played for those that year. And any Leaf like Matthews, Marner, Nylander, they have 8 straight years of playoff entries because they have made the playoffs in 8 straight years, and they will have a 9th once the playoffs start for them on April 20th.
All right. One more thing before Stick Taps. You had a great article with Michael Russo, just, again, projecting how crazy the offseason could be, particularly with offer sheets. Why is this year the year where GMs could finally take advantage of this device that could actually make the offseason even more exciting than it can normally be?
Well, it depends who you ask, right? Some people think the raised salary cap is going to mean there's less offer sheets or there's less threat of them because more teams have money to match. But there are others out there, and this is sort of covered in the article, that believe the conditions are ripe for them because, first of all, lots of teams have lots of money to spend. The flip side of this, there's not enough talent in the UFA pool to direct all that money to for the amount of teams that are going to be out there looking to improve. We're existing in a world where you just saw Dylan Hollowell and Philip Broberg, Basically, the Oilers were backed into a corner and lost those players via offer sheet to St. Louis last summer. Both those players have had great years for the Blues and are part of the success St. Louis is having. And I just think in general, the atmosphere has changed slightly. I mean, whether you want to call it or not, there was an idea that it was the wrong thing to do. Unofficially, I mean, it was obviously part of the rules. It's been part of the CBA that these have been allowed. But, if you go back to, in recent enough memory for me, Brian Burke challenged another GM to a fight in a barn, Kevin Lowe at the time, for offer sheeting his player, Dustin Penner.
Unbelievable.
And, it's almost like too crazy to believe. That didn't stop offer sheets in their tracks. That was in the summer of 2007. In 2008, actually, there was Vancouver and St. Louis each offer sheeted a player from each other. First, it was Vancouver offer sheeting David Backes. Then St. Louis offer sheeted a player by the name of Steve Bernier from the Canucks. Both teams matched. Then you go to 2012. You had Shea Weber signing a massive offer sheet with Philadelphia. Nashville matched that. But in that period, there was clearly a cooling off where we didn't see a lot of offer sheets. I think there was an idea it was sort of either inflationary, wrong thing to do, against the gentleman's agreement. It also wasn't a good way to get players. Like, let's call it what it is. I mean, there's all those factors go into the set of decisions that were made or not made during that time. But I just think that it's changed now. And I don't think it's viewed it's just viewed as a tool. And as much as the raised cap means that teams are probably going to be under less salary cap pressure, there's still going to be some teams that are in tough spots that have to extend existing players that have, a lot of contracts already in the books. And, I just think teams are going to be more likely trying to do it. So it's not necessarily a prediction. Alan Walsh is quoted in the piece. He predicted it's going to be the summer of the offer sheet. That's his words. I'm not sure that's necessarily the case, but I think it could be the case. And so, that's what the article tries to explore, just all these different nuances. But there's a lot of appealing players that are restricted free agents that are in line for raises. And, teams typically try to keep the cost down on those guys. And maybe someone could expose something. I mean, that's what we're going to have to see this summer.
Siege, we got to get out of here. Let's do some stick taps. I feel like you right now. I feel like a dog ate my homework. So I'll just say, for the races going on out east and out west, you know what? Actually, I'll give it to St. Louis. St. Louis, the fact that they've won 10 in a row and they've completely just run through all the other prospective teams for that wild card spot in the West, absolutely incredible to see them perform the way that they have. I mean, sucks for Calgary and sucks for Vancouver, but what a story the St. Louis Blues have been. And the fact that they've won 10 in a row, that's an amazing story. So I'll give them my stick tap.
I'm going to go a little off the board, maybe, and go with Dylan McIlrath. And full disclosure, I was watching the Caps game on Tuesday, and Dylan McIlrath got in a fight with Jeffrey Viel. And I was like, wow, Dylan McIlrath in the league, he's fighting in this game. And then I look it up, and it was his first game since December 23rd. And for those that may not know, Dylan McIlrath was a long ago 10th overall pick by the Rangers. He is 32-year-old defenseman, spent a lot of time in the American Hockey League. He's literally gone years between NHL games, like multiple times during throughout his career as a player. He won 2 Calder Cups the last 2 years in Hershey, and he spent this entire year with the Capitals. He's played only 12 games, and he's been a healthy scratch. That means for 60-odd games. And I just thought, wow, good for him for, first of all, just persevering, playing through, being a hyped prospect, but finding his way. He sounds like he's a really valuable member of this Capitals team, a big vibes guy. He actually recently signed a 2-year contract extension. And so, as much as I like to stick tap the player getting his first game or his first shift or his first goal, I'm gonna stick tap one of the vets that is out there doing a lot of bag skates, I'm sure. Been watching a lot of games from the press box or the dressing room, but he's still out there giving his best when he gets a chance to play. And so I'm going to stick tap Dylan McIlrath. It's been probably a pretty cool year for him too, just being a full-time NHL player, even if he's not playing a lot of games, and he's on a team that's winning a lot of games, and he seems to be a valued member of that team.
Love that for him. A 3-time Calder Cup champion, by the way, Dylan McElrath. Get your questions in for our next episode of the CJ Show and subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so already. Thanks so much for tapping in, whether you're listening or watching, and we'll talk to you all next time.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.